My name is Paul Nunes-Dier. I'm a certified professional facilitator from the IAF, which stands for International Association of Facilitators. Since 2018, I've started a book series on architecting collaboration, and my latest book, in co-authorship with Martin Duffy and other renowned digital facilitators and guest co-authors, is titled Beyond Virtual Meetings. It's all about the importance of the digital tools that can extend and augment the power of you as a facilitator and a meeting host in virtual online meetings, but also on the hybrid meetings that are going to be so much needed in this post-pandemic era. Along with my co-author Martin Duffy and esteemed PhD colleague, we host Talk to Your Meeting Daughters, a series of hosted conversations with meeting experts that can advise you about how to transition to this new normal and take advantage of this incredible once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to make the organization of your meetings more sustainable and effective. Please stand by as the next show will start momentarily. Welcome, everybody. It's really great to be here with all of you watching us now. It's awesome that we are gathering here again with Eric de Groot, founder of Mind Meeting and renowned author of at least 2 books in the field of meeting design. We are going to discuss his work today. And again, it's a pleasure to have you here with me. Martin, good morning.
Nice to see you again, Paul. Eric, you're very welcome to join us, and many thanks for taking the time to have another chat with us.
You're welcome. I'm looking forward to this.
For joining us. We had a really interesting and stimulating conversation the last day. It's not normally our practice actually to have a second part, but as I recall our previous discussion, you raised a number of really interesting points. And while we felt we had gone quite wide, which was really good on meeting design, we didn't go quite as deep. And we thought perhaps if we did a short recap on the width of our conversation the last time, today we might be able to drill into how meeting design actually works in practice. And that's obviously where you have world level expertise. So if I could just recap, one of the opening key point that you made to us was that meeting design is applicable to every possible type of meeting, but you equally qualify that by saying it's typically assigned to meetings that might be a little bit problematic in the organization. Okay. Couple of key issues then that flowed out of that for us was this idea of silos in organizations where they might work in silos. Question of ownership or buy-in to meetings. Who owns the meetings? Who has participative buy-in. Another area was knowing how we're progressing. Are we just meeting for the sake of meeting, or are we actually making progress over time with our meetings? And then a final key issue that you identified for us was this idea of sustainability. Can we keep on doing what we're doing, or are we going to implode? Are we going to pay too big a price? A really interesting point that you made, which I found particularly fascinating, was this idea of treating your meetings as process driven. And you introduced us to the idea of there is a before the meeting, so there's the whole preparation and setup and invitations and so on. And there's how we can design that phase versus the meeting itself and how we might design that. And then there's the follow-up, what happens after the meetings, the follow-through, which in some ways might logically lead into next meetings, creating this processual flow, and meeting design then can take that into account, and you might be able to help us to understand that in more detail. Another fascinating point was engaging with the principle of opening doors and opening minds. So those 2 elements to the mindset that drives meetings in particular organizations versus the literal having open doors in organizations. So that brought us into the idea of the underlying culture that the organizations might have, the natural dispositions towards their meetings. And that then begs the question that, well, if we want to go down a meeting design route, what type of things might we now have to deal with? And again, a key phrase that you used, which again I found just particularly insightful and raises a whole bunch of questions, was the prison of people's minds. That was a phrase that we used. And how do we escape the prison of people's minds? And meeting design might just be, that could be the place that we might have to start with our design work. The final point that we discussed, and then we ended our conversation, but hence we wanted to follow it up, Eric, was, so typically if executive team members are open to the idea of meeting design and improving their meetings, it may require a certain level of coaching, a certain level of engagement with the minds before we get into the practice of the meetings. So there's a whole panoply of possible topics that we could talk about from a meeting design point of view. I think you can see why, when we reflected on our discussion, very broad, some wonderfully challenging thoughts, but perhaps we thought maybe you could take us through a little bit of depth of how does meeting design work?
Boom.
Whoa.
That was a summary of a religion, Martin. So we can talk all day about it. Did we really cover this? My goodness. Now,
yeah.
Of course, the how is critical here, and that is a good point to elaborate on this. How do you do this? And let's skip something. Let's skip the skill and the technicalities of talking to the meeting owner. That is a pivotal discussion always. The person who calls the shots in an organization, and how do you get that person on board? Or even better, how do you sort of clarify what that person has in mind for the organization? That is a big thing that I've struggled with and learned how to do that over the years. And as soon as the strange thing is, as soon as you think, oh, I'm doing quite well, you again make a horrible mistake. So, but that is again that is crucial. We work for meeting owners, and the meeting owner doesn't work for us. That is how it is, right? So now let's presume that the meeting owners got these ideas about where the organization should go to, and then the question is, how can meetings influence this? I think that will narrow it down a little bit. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's an interesting thought. We are skipping a really fundamental point, which I fully get and I fully understand that. And then I suppose if we skip straight into how maybe that process idea that we discussed the last day, this thing of there's a before the meeting, there's a during the meeting, and there's an after the meeting. So from the mechanics of the meeting perspective, maybe that would be a place that we could start, and some of the other points that you made the last day might naturally flow out of that.
Now, maybe it's a mistake to skip the whole conversation with the meeting owner. That could be the case, but let's presume that the meeting owner's got an idea of what's going on in the organization, right? And then what we discover quite often is that for some reason meeting owners tend to see a meeting as a one of a kind, as a okay, we have to deal with this content in this meeting, and let's try to focus on how we can get the content across, how we can put that content into the heads of our participants. That's quite often the starting point. But then a couple of simple questions will lead to the idea of, oh, right, now there's going to be a meeting, but there's going to be another meeting and another and another. So it's a series. And then quite often a CEO knows how important a meeting can be in terms of how that person relates to the colleagues. You know, a big guy in a big organization can mess up with a meeting once, and then people will say, okay, he's had a bad day. Why not? You know, stuff can happen. And then a second time they're going to say, whoa, another bad day. Mm. And then the third day, the person is gone. So quite often high-level people know how important meetings can be also for their own survival.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that gives you a door to having a discussion about, now what do you think the meeting needs to contribute to what is going on among your colleagues, besides what the content is that we have to tackle. And that is an interesting phenomenon, because then you have to help people. What they say, what are you talking about now? I say, okay, now let's try the metaphor of chemistry. What is the chemical reaction that you want to have in the meeting this time, and how is it related to a next chemical? I'm using chemical because it's such an ideal metaphor. What is what is the sort of chemistry that you want? The word chemistry in English is also chemistry between people, right? It's the same word, yeah. Now, as soon as you get the conversation in that field, it becomes really interesting. And then people tend to say stuff like, well, you know, in our organization, for some reason, the young people are not taken serious. And that is and that is concerning me, the meeting owner says. Okay, now we have something. Besides the content, we have a certain chemistry that we can attack or that we can change. And then we discover that meetings are the ideal circumstance to actually do that. Because, I mean, communication people know you can send out notes saying, in our organization, we want the young people to be taken more seriously. You can write that down to people and send it out and then expect that they're going to do it. Now forget it. If it doesn't happen in a big meeting where the top management and the middle management is gathered, then they won't react to any written suggestion about how to change behavior. But in a meeting, it can work, and it can work pretty quickly as well.
That's really interesting. There's a picture, as you've described that, Eric, there's a picture conjuring in my mind of going to my local doctor with a medical problem.
Yeah.
And the doctor is looking at my whole person, not just this symptom, you know, the rash on my arm or the pain in my leg. And it is that where you're getting at? Are you seeing the meetings then as almost like a diagnostic tool, a way into the organization, and equally then, so the extension at the back end of what you said there, when you talk about the example of young people aren't being heard, are the meetings then a possible treatment for whatever ailments we identify as underlying? Is that what I'm hearing?
You couldn't summarize it better, Martin. Exactly. It's diagnostic and therapeutic at the same time.
Whoa. Okay,
so.
I think, Paul, that's a first for us, Paul, that we've encountered in 2.5 years of having these discussions about the role that meetings are fulfilling that is not obvious and in your face.
Absolutely. But then, Martin, my question is, if
meetings are at the same time diagnostic and therapeutical, are the meeting owners willing to get cured in the first place? Because that's what I know from the patients that refuse to get treatment, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's a good question, and the point is sometimes yes, sometimes no.
But maybe that goes back to your opening comment, Eric, and it's, I'm not saying we have to join that conversation right now, but understanding the meeting owners before we ever go into the meetings or before we ever engage the organization, understanding that point is so fundamental to being able to use meetings as diagnostic or therapeutic or both. We're back to those meeting owners at the executive team level. Is that a fair observation?
Oh yeah, it is, yeah. And then, well, you can influence the willingness of meeting owners to wanting to be cured. And a trick, I call it a trick. In fact, it's not a trick, but it works pretty well, is to directly, before you have that conversation about what are we going to do in the meeting, to go to the participants first. So you say, okay, let me, and that's a proposal that I do quite often. I say, now you're going to invest a hell of a lot of money and a hell of a lot of time and attention to this.
Yeah.
Why not allow me to talk to just a small number of those future participants first? I give them a call or I visit them, and it's going to take 3 hours in total. I talk half an hour to each of them, and 6 people is more than enough.
Yeah.
And then I take notes and I make quotes. So I say to them, I'm not going to tell you any names. I'm not going to tell you, because that's not important. I'm going to tell you exactly what people in essence said and how they said it. Now then I come back to the meeting owner and say, listen, these are the quotes. Young R&D professional says, everything that I do is not taking seriously. I tend to quit here. And then you can see the face of this CEO, right? He can have the total conviction of my company thriving and we doing a really good thing in bonding with young talents. And then he hears this.
Yeah.
Now, as long as this person is not an idiot, he's going to react and say, oh my goodness, that's surprising. And then I give him another quote and another, and then I say, my diagnosis is these people feel blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
How about using this meeting to make a change here? And then the meeting owner says, yeah, that would be good, but how? Exactly the question that we try to tackle today. How can you do this? Because they see meetings as content train stations and not as therapeutical sessions, or not as sense-making sessions. And then it becomes interesting, because that's my job. So I can say, that's my job. Let me come up with a proposal, and you don't have to know, because it's not your job, it's my job. And then we take it from there. Now, when there is total clarity, where the meeting owner says, I want my young people to be taken seriously, I mean, that is a very good start to come up with an interesting meeting design. Of course. And I've done stuff that without any doubt shook them up. Oh my goodness, our young people have useful things to say. We didn't know that.
So a key lesson or a key point, Eric, that I'm taking out of what you're saying there is that meeting design, it's not off the shelf. It's not formulaic. It's not necessarily here are the 5 steps for meeting design, problem solved. It sounds like it's much more about problem identification and then tailoring meeting activity, engagement, or otherwise to deal with specific problems in parallel with the normal content that's on the meeting agenda.
Exactly.
So now we're seeing the meeting from 2 very different perspectives. We're seeing it as the traditional view, which you mentioned at the very start, that a typical CEO will see it as functional. There's an agenda, there's a set of items to be done, we get them done, next item. Whereas what you're talking about here is, if we have a look at the organization, if we diagnose issues, and now if we tailor the meetings to deal with those issues. So that if I've got that correct, that then brings us to say, okay, and you said it yourself there, we're now at the nub of the, so how are we going to design meetings to solve problems?
Yeah.
You might step us through your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Now your summary is perfect. That is exactly what it is about. We shouldn't lose the content out of sight, of course, but at the same time we design a process to get things right. And it is not off the shelf, but we have tools, of course.
Yeah.
And let's cover a couple of tools here. First of all, and there's not an order in the tools, but let's mention a few. First of all, there is group work. You can think of group work. Okay, now if you want people to relate differently to each other, and you want them to use the content, you're going to design a certain way of group work, which means, okay, we're going to have, let's take this, we want the young people to speak out example, right? Let's take that to make it very concrete.
Sure.
We're going to do group work, and we give them a slice of the content, and we want them to summarize what they think the organization needs to do, and that needs to be written down in a tweet, right? We give them half an hour, or let's say 45 minutes, and we put them in smaller groups, because in bigger groups, the natural tendency of what the organization normally does becomes bigger. In smaller groups, you have more leeway to influence stuff. Now, having this young people need to speak out thing in mind, we know that somewhere in the group work, this needs to become very concrete. Okay, now what we do, we split up these 200 people in groups of 5-6 people, and then every 10 minutes we ring a bell, and that gives the opportunity for each young people in every group to speak out for a minute, and everybody else needs to just shut up
and listen. Yeah,
and listen to that young people, and that person is allowed to say anything, and that's the deal. Now, group work tends to be very effective, and the tool that we have is, if you have a good facilitator / moderator, you can let people do about anything that comes up in your mind.
Yeah.
So this sheds another light to the tools that we need in meeting design. We need to have good facilitators and moderators, because any design is lost if there's no one there that can execute the design correctly.
Yeah.
Now, that's another tool. You need to have people guiding the meeting that accept the responsibility of being a real good guide, and a guide that says, this is what we're going to do, guide, nothing else. This is what we're going to do. Now, that is one thing. That brings me to another tool. You have to have the CEO or the top management aligned with this. So another thing that I pay attention to is, okay, if we're going to do something, what is the specific role of our top management people in that specific part of the program? How do I see this? And that leads to sometimes hilarious situations, because if you in a meeting you have problems that need to be solved or ideas that need to be generated, quite often the very top, the board members, shouldn't be part of this. Because
Yes.
I quite often say to CEOs, guys, it's not your job to solve problems, it's your job to create problems, and to look into the future, and to be the pilot, the person that is piloting the organization through the upcoming storms. That is your role, not to start thinking about these little problems that need to be solved. So another tool is use the position of the top management in a very specific way, in a very transparent way. So if during the group work, I'm going to say in public, and everybody listens in, I say, now while you're doing this, I've just asked the board members to have a cup of coffee and to do nothing. And then everybody's totally surprised. What, huh? Why is this? I said, it's not their job. It's your job. Come up with solutions, and they're going to say if the solution is going to be accepted, yes or no. So that's another, and that works very strongly, because we all know we are animals, and we try to follow the leader. So if the leader does something significant, then people will listen carefully to this.
Yeah.
So that is a third tool that I pay attention to. Now, fourth is this plethora of formats that you can use, and that is formats that are being designed deliberately for a specific meeting, or stuff that we've done already and that we can adjust and repeat. And then I'm talking about anything that you could do around content that will have an influence on how people relate to each other, like debate, like role play, like simulations, demonstrations, the whole stuff of what people can do together, and that will generate some sort of an outcome, and that makes sense, and that is, which is important, can be fun and generate energy at the same time.
And Eric, sorry if I interrupt Martin here.
No, let's go ahead, Paul.
Yeah.
Are you familiar, or have you experienced in any way serious gaming like Lego and this kind of artifacts that normally HR corporate managers are so fond of?
Yeah. Oh,
What
yes.
are your views on these serious games?
Oh, serious games can be very effective. A lack of my experiences. I've actually never done the official Lego serious play, but I experimented with Lego myself, and that was really fun. That was really good. So,
can you expand that a little bit for us, Eric? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, well, that was a technical firm, and this technical firm was really struggling with bigger projects, and they were losing lots of money in just not managing big projects well enough. And then the meeting owner complained. He said that they just don't talk to each other, and they accept big projects, and then they turn into bleeders. And we don't know how it works. We don't have this specific experience in how we have to deal with each other in such a project. okay, now I worked on this, and I bought 3 of these advanced Lego models of Formula One cars. And these guys were technical engineers.
Oh, okay.
A technical firm, so they turned into little boys when seeing one of these models. They really liked it, right? So we ourselves, the group wasn't too big. It was really the top management, about I don't know, about 20 to 30 people, I think, and we divided them in 3 teams, and me and my colleague, we played the guys that ordered these cars, right? And we asked them, organize yourself. We need to have an account manager who's going to talk to us. We need to have a project manager, and you need to have technicians that put this model together. And you guys, you have to cooperate. Now, they did pretty good. Up till the moment that me and my colleague, we started to make adjustments. We said, well, we want a bit of a how about turning the model into a yellow one? And then they totally freaked out. They really panicked. And then their whole organization collapsed in all 3 groups. And that was really interesting to observe. Because we asked the meeting owner, you're not going to cooperate, you're going to sit and see what's going on here. And then we give our feedback in the end. We can even stop the serious game at a certain point and say, okay, guys, this is what you do. Now adjust your behavior here. Yeah. And one of the big mistakes they made was when, as the guy who was ordering the Formula One cars was changing his mind, they saw it as a problem. And we said to them, okay, stop. Now there are more adjustments coming. Why don't you see this as a source of extra income?
Yeah.
And say, okay, now you've been commissioning a Formula car, one car now needs to be yellow. That is going to cost you a bit of money, and we need some more time. But let's discuss it. Now, instead of doing that, generating more income and more work, they panicked because the initial assignment was screwed up.
That's really interesting. And like the things that you're touching on with that example, Eric, are the fundamentals of project management, aren't they? Right. And you know, the essence of scope definition, the essence of managing scope creep, the essence of creating boundaries for when are we within the parameters of the contract versus when are we outside. And all of this is being done in the context of designing our meetings in order to be better able to manage these types of variations that arrive, whatever the project, whatever our activity.
I mean, right.
Fascinating stuff, Paul. I'm just mindful of our time. Yeah. We're about 35 minutes in. Eric, I have a feeling we could do episode 10, 11, 12, and 13 on this topic.
that wouldn't be enough. That would be enough, Matt.
Yeah, it's from like you've given us some very rich examples there, and you've made it tangible with some of the practicalities of granular things that might be done. Before we wrap up, could I take us back to the very beginning of our conversation? And before we get into the meeting design, getting into the heads of the organization leaders, could you just talk to us a little bit about that just before we wrap it all up? Because it's so rich, but I kind of feel that we missed a fundamental building block to.
Yeah. Well, I have a building block here. This is the book. Yep. It contains 40 chapters, and each chapter covers something that any meeting has in it, a certain aspect. How do you start? Is there anything that you can do with catering, with transportation, that will add to the value of the meeting instead of just putting food into people's stomachs, etc.? It goes on and on and on. So your estimate of that we need 13 more episodes is correct. Now, if we missed something, yeah, maybe, which is again pretty abstract, but that says something about that very specifics of what a meeting is compared to other ways of communication, and it all comes down to the very aspect of face-to-face meetings, that people are in the same room and they pick up, they were able to use all their senses instead of the online thing that you just see a fraction of what another person is. And that is a very interesting thing. Neuroscience has gone into this extensively, talking about how people react on body language, on pheromones, that smells of people, how they move, the rhythm of, etc. This is the micro expressions is another one. You just don't pick up micro expressions when you're connected online. You pick them up when you're in the same room with other people. So that is a very deep understanding. This is why we need face-to-face meetings. If you want to cooperate with people, you have to put them in the same room and let them interact. That is something. But I don't know if that is answering your question, if we missed something.
Can I actually add to that, Eric, because you've just touched a sensory nerve in my brain here as well with that comment. When I was doing my own research on meetings, one of the aspects that I looked at was sense making. And I came across this model, which was enactment, selection, and retention. So when we make sense out of something, we first have to try to absorb as much of the environment in which we're trying to make sense as possible. But if we want to report that back into a meeting, so let's take the example of our young designers who are not being listened to. They're out there looking at the problems. When they come to a meeting, they've had a week to absorb the problem. They now have 1 minute to actually enact. So that's the first step of the sense-making journey, is the enactment piece. The second part then is to make sense out of that. So we engage with it, but we can only partially represent the totality of what we bring into the meeting. Once we've done that in the meeting, so let's take 5 of our junior colleagues that contribute their 1 minute piece. We now have to do something called selection. We collectively have to select, we can only select 2 out of the 5. So now we're distilling 5 weeks of experience into 2 sound bites. And then if we multiply that across 10 items on the agenda, that's 20 items that we have selected, but our ability to retain, and that's the third part of the sense-making model, is this idea of retention that we carry forward to our next engagement interaction. So that enactment, selection, and retention, but we can't retain all 20. We can only retain 5. So we've gone from this world out there to this micro dot on our meetings summary or our meetings minutes. And the picture that you've made there of this sensory expression. Now, I've only talked about the clinical content, but if I take your point correctly, there's the whole engagement of the people. It's the organization, it's the culture, and the content. It's almost, by the way, it's almost a side story, because what I think I'm hearing from you is at the core of all of this, it's about the people engagement and interaction. And the meetings are a place where that gets expressed.
Yeah.
Which then defines how are we going to work? Are we going to panic when the color changed? Or are we actually going to say, no, actually, we got this. Okay, they're going to change the color. How do we? And now that's all process driven. That's about how we as an organization act, engage, interact. And I think what you're saying is we do it through our meetings.
Yeah, yeah. I like your model, Martin. I would like to add something here. It is a pretty cognitive model.
Yeah. Yeah.
The thing is, in meetings, the body memory is at work as well.
Yeah, really interesting.
And if we again relate to the young people that need to speak out, if you allow them to stand up and they're being applauded when they say something, then there's something else working here, and that is just the body memory of doing that. And the next time, standing up and speaking out will be easier.
Yeah.
And it is amazing how quick this can work as well, and that is maybe something that we have to stress out. A meeting is not adding together all the individual processes of the participants. There's an extra layer here. There's a layer because there are multiple people that relate to each other. There's a group process going on. And as soon as one of the young people stands up and speaks out, all the other young people will have a feeling about this.
Yeah.
And somehow they inhale that body memory as well. And for them, standing up and speaking out the next time is going to be more easy as well. So that is why it still fascinates me, because there's some sort of a magical layer in meetings, stuff that is happening only because there are multiple people in the same room. And
change one of those people, and that dynamic changes.
Yes, that is why we talk about chemistry and about catalysts. Just one little molecule can change the whole thing. And here we go. Yeah, and that's fascinating. And I'm still surprised about how some of these things turn out to work, and how you can influence it. Well, sometimes it's very simple, sometimes it's hidden, but it is always fascinating how that works.
That idea of the kinesthetics, so that idea of body memory, sensory memory, that's a fascinating thought and a fascinating idea. Maybe we'll end up with part 3 here, Eric.
we are going to have soon a colleague of yours, Eric, Adrian Seeger. Yeah, I'm sure you know him well.
Oh yeah.
I think you both are pioneers in the meeting industry. Participatory movement, shall we call it that way? I'm not sure it's the right one.
Oh yeah.
Including of course also Harrison Owen, the creator of open space technology, also a methodology for having people to converse with each other, with all this bodily experience that also make part of a physical meeting. But my question to you, Eric, before you go, and Martin, if I may, just because I love the title of your book, Meetings by Default or by Design. And that's an interesting question. But my question to you, Eric, is then, how would you help the meeting owner, a chief executive officer or a chief executive on any company, to take the risk to, instead of following meeting by default, hire someone like you to have a meeting by design? So what's the risk-taking proposition here?
I turn it upside down, and I'll say to that CEO or that meeting owner, do you want to take the risk to do the default? I mean, again, it proved to be useful to use that example of young people speaking out. Right now, the default here is okay. We need young people to speak out. Let's find a 40K American speaker on empowering young people, right? And here it comes, and 40 minutes of PowerPoint saying, young people this, young people that, and let's do it, and yell, etc. And then I say to the meeting owner, now ask yourself, do you really think this is going to change the behavior of your young people? Is that really going to work? You want to take the risk of that default approach to this problem, or do you want something that might work even better? Now that is a question, and then again, I need to be relaxed about it. They say no, the default, the speaker is good, and I'll take the risk that it's going to be a waste of money. I said okay, good, but then you don't need me. That's another that's good for your budget as well, right? So that is how I see things, and it's obvious that quite often people are not ready for this yet.
Yeah.
They still believe in speakers doing all the work. The hospitality virus is still in everywhere around in the meetings industry. We want people to enjoy themselves. Enjoy? Why should they enjoy themselves if they don't let the young people speak out? What is the reason of being enjoyed? Is that useful? Yeah, but so I call that a virus. It's an infection.
I love that expression.
And as soon as they start thinking, okay, maybe you're right. This is not about entertainment. We're trying to achieve something. Then they start to open up for, okay, now is there any other way of achieving this instead of giving them good food and a nice speaker? Now that would be my answer, Paul.
Yeah. That's
Can I pose a final question to you, Eric? And again, this is born partly out of my own experience, but I'd be interested to hear your experience. I've organized quite a few open space events over the years, and my consistent experience is that left brain versus right brained type of people have a natural predisposition to be averse to open space approach, or to be very positive toward open space approach. So I'll make it tangible with a specific example where I worked with a large group of engineers, predominantly engineers. And when you mention the idea that there's no preordained agenda, that we're going to spend the first 45 minutes where you, the participants, are going to write your own agenda, they go, whoa,
Ooh, whoa.
oh, no, we can't do it that way. Versus if we take a group of architects, and I've worked with a group of architects,
They're more used
and you
to
put exactly the same proposition to a group of architects,
Yep.
they look at it and they'll say, oh, okay, that's interesting. Not sure how it's going to work, but that's interesting. Let's have a go.
They do it all the time. They do it all the time. The architects do it all the time themselves. They know how it works. There's a blank sheet of paper, and they start coming up with ideas. So that is exactly why it is not off the shelf. You have to sort of find a connection to the group you work with. These engineers, throwing them into an open space of half a day or a quarter of a day is a bit too much at first.
Yeah.
So give them a small example first, and then next time do it a bit bigger, and then the third time you can do whatever you like, because then they understand the fun and they start trusting themselves as a group, right? Again, as a group, trust that they can come up with interesting ideas to talk about. And at first they just don't see themselves this way.
Yeah. So
No,
do you find that across all different types of groupings of scientists, administrators, executives?
yeah.
So is that a key part, understanding that group psyche or group mentality? Is that a key part of the design process to get into that mindset from the get-go? Is that
it is. It absolutely, and knowing where you have to make it more challenging and all, because these architects, they know what it is to start from a blank sheet of paper, so you can make it more challenging for them. And also know that in some fields it is a lost case. It's you. And for instance, scientists, when you put them together under the same room, scientists are really difficult. I mean, they're so content focused all the time, and at the same time they play all these horrible university games in which it is important to give a lecture, to be on the stage, regardless of whatever you say. So that is a really difficult group to grasp, which is strange, because you should say, come on, scientists, there is science about how people learn.
Yeah.
And that says learning is best accomplished when giving people different formats. You could be a lecture, but at the same time a demonstration, a simulation, group work, blah, 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 everything, debates, open space. The mix is working in the best possible way. And even then, the scientists will say, no, we don't want anything of this. We just want to have lectures. All right. Now that I find that a difficult group. I find it a difficult group to work with. And then, of course, aligned with this is your intercultural understanding of where people are and what their background is. I worked in Russia, and I had groups of students there, and I had them do group work. And then every time a group comes back and reports in 2 minutes what they've been doing, and then every time the boys stood up and the girls just evaporated. So after about 20 minutes into this reporting, I said, okay, stop. Now, guys, if you want Russia to become a meeting heaven, and you want to really progress, then you're gonna need the girls, the females here. Now, sorry, but I'm gonna interfere here, and I'm not gonna accept any presentation of boys anymore, of males. And they were totally flabbergasted, right? That was really fun. For me, that was fun. And
that's
then
interesting.
Afterwards, they came to me, and these young students said, "My God, that was a couple of years ago, obviously before anything that is currently in our minds when we think of Russia. That was in the middle of Sverdlovsk, in the middle of Russia, and the students came to me and said, "My goodness, this was great fun." And we never addressed by an adult in this way. We never do that. We never encounter this. So that is an example of trying to zoom in on the specific situation people are in, and taking culture into account as well. Yeah.
Fascinating.
Fascinating. Martin, I think we have to go now.
We do, Paul. Time has caught up with us. Eric, really fascinating discussion. I think I've summarized at 2 or 3 points along our journey in our discussion there.
Yep.
My final takeaway from what you've said to us there actually goes back to the very beginning of our conversation, which is that entry point into the organization, the mindset of the people who own the meetings. That's the first entry point. The next entry point then is, in the meetings, perhaps to think a little bit disruptively, to perhaps think a little bit about how do we safely disrupt people's comfort zone so that we get more out of them than they think they have to give. And through that, in a safe space, we can create an environment where their meetings are much, much more than the sum of the individual parts of the agenda, or even the individual parts of the participants, that there's a much more holistic prize to be won if we take the entry point first, diagnose it, engage with it, work tailored to meet its needs, and then work within the organization tailored. There's no off the shelf, but there is a toolbox. I think that's the way that you put it. And certainly there's a very, very rich seam of thinking, and I think your book will contribute very significantly to people's understanding of that.
Oh yeah.
Many thanks, Eric.
Okay, you're welcome. It was fun again.
Yeah, it's great to have you here, Eric, with us today. And again, dear viewers, thanking so much for joining us today. It's part 2 of this conversation. We are Talk to Your Meeting Doctors. This is a LinkedIn live series hosted by Martin Duffy and myself. We have the privilege to have here today Eric de Groot from Mind Meeting, and we host these top meeting experts in our shows, bringing together a wealth of expertise and experience. I hope you have all benefited from Eric today. Thank you so much.
Good. Have a good day.
Good one. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.